Thank you for coming today. This session is going to be about test-driven development for Dynamics 365 or CDS now. How many of you basically are working with CRM projects right now? How many of you are actual developers? How many of you do unit testing? Nice. How many of you know about me, basically, then? Okay, not too bad. So basically, so this is me. I have basically a small company set up in Barcelona, which is basically does CRM consultancy, but mostly is developer intensive. I'm also the author of this open source framework called Fake XRM Easy. So this framework is just allows you to kind of, from a developer perspective, to replace CRM and just talk to implement your plugins or your code activities or anything really that uses the CRM SDK, but locally from your Visual Studio, or if you run that as part of PSTS build. So the same thing. It makes unit testing for Dynamics really, really, really easy, because before this I was struggling to mock all the different fetch XML, square expressions, etc. And then you would find on Stack Overflow people was just implementing their own, and they have different versions. So why not just try to consolidate them all into just one, and it's open source. And yesterday I pushed some changes as well for kind of do the same thing for the client side, so for talking to the web API. So I'm going to do a session basically, I hope, to do some live coding using .NET and then some JavaScript. And yeah, so that's me. If you want to reach me out, then there's my LinkedIn and my Twitter account. So the agenda basically, why unit testing is important for CRM is something actually, maybe 5-6 years ago, no one was even caring about this for a Dynamics perspective. But now, because things, especially in relation to the keynote, where changes keep changing faster and faster and faster, you have to be able to deliver continuous value, and you cannot do that without automation. Yeah, so that's basically, this is to support that that very first stage of the development process, which starts with unit testing. And then so I'm gonna basically do a small session. Oh, by the way, I created a GitHub repo if you want to. If some of you have laptops, no. Okay. If you want to check this out later, then you can just go into this repo and I'll show you. But basically, have examples about how to do both things, .NET and JavaScript. So why unit testing is important for organizations today that have Dynamics? It's because of this. Gets better, yeah. There you go. This is how basically fixing a bug in production looks like. So one of the key things we want to address with unit testing is basically we all as developers hate fixing bugs in production, because you are just working under pressure, and that's not happy. You feel really sad with it. And also just in connection with the release cycle, because not just that you want to mitigate those bugs, but also you want to accelerate the deployment of, once you start building on top of an existing code base, you start the project over, times basically flies, and then the project gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So you should be able to still deliver the same kind of quality, regardless of the size of the code base. So that's basically what the test automation gives you: is the ability to just not worry about the regression automation testing, but also to drive when writing, especially for this framework, when you start writing a plugin or a code activity, is also to be able to implement and test your changes even before you deploy them to CRM. So just to avoid that kind of pain cycle of making changes, plugin registration tool, deploy, open up the web browser, etc., etc. So basically, this sits within the whole DevOps story. And actually, while Hamza is doing a session only about this, which is the last one, and it's about being able to deliver always as fast as you can, but you cannot deliver as fast as you can if you're testing things manually, basically. So that's why we need automation. Yeah. So basically, a combination of those two things is, along with many others, this is just a small piece, but actually it's quite a bigger piece as well, is what basically helps deliver continuous business value and then just get the feedback you want to actually keep reacting to those changes in the environment, which is basically what you need. So in terms of test automation, basically we have different stages. This session is going to cover only the unit testing, but have you used Easy Repro? Yeah? I'm not going to cover it because it's 40 minutes, 50 minutes, but today is basically going to be mostly about unit testing. But for UI testing, you can use that framework called Easy Repro, which is by Microsoft, and you can just basically using Selenium behind the scenes. And for integration testing, you can use this framework as well, or you can just call the organization service or the web API directly. But it's ideal too. Basically, the unit testing is important because the more basically issues you find during the development, then the less you will have on the later stages. And the more you have on the later stages, then they are more basically more costly to fix because there's more people involved. When you have a bug in the UI, maybe the developer doesn't even realize this. It has to go to the functional testing team or the UAT team, or even worse, it could end up in production, and then you have to repeat the process. You have to fix the bug, but before you can fix the bug, you try to reproduce the bug in your environment with some data from production, and then before you get to that point where you spend like 2 hours, and then you have to try and find the root cause of what the hell that's failing. And that's basically what unit testing gives you. It gives you the isolation, and it gives you exactly where something might be failing without even having to spend time trying to figure out. So from a dynamics perspective, because when we use CRM, we just basically use 2 different languages, .NET, JavaScript, and now TypeScript as well. It's getting famous. I was using it like 3 years ago, and no one trusts me. But now, in relation with the Power Apps component framework, this is basically what you need to use and get familiar if you're not using it already, because it's what is needed to basically be able to develop and also in future test the components. Right now, the way you use for example, the Power Apps component framework doesn't allow you to use your own React components yet, but eventually will be. So if you use React, which is basically what the PCF is using behind the scenes to render, the offline and the online capabilities, you will need to get familiar with something probably called Jest, which is the test framework for testing, TypeScript, React components as well. And I'm gonna do a demo using Jest as well today. So what you see today is not only helpful for just testing with the web API, but it will be also helpful for you to test PCF whenever that's supported. And that's it. So if you want, for server-side code, basically we use .NET, and for .NET there is that NuGet package called FetchXRM Easy. And then for the client side, that's basically, you can do 2 things right now. Apart from the PCF, which is a completely different world now, you can do basically JavaScript on the XRM page, on the form logic, and you can basically talk to the web API endpoint. So in order to do that, there are basically 2 different packages. The one that I was working on, which is on NPM, FetchXRM Easy, that's only for the web API endpoint to simulate that when you say, give me all the accounts where name starts with wherever, then it returns something you can use then to test the remaining logic in the form. And that package, this was created by Dave Clark, which is also open source. That was his baby, and I just reuse it. And it's really nice. So what's new in this session? Basically, there's always new messages and features coming up on the .NET. Actually, I have 10 pull requests waiting for me for approval. but the day only has 24 hours. So on the last couple of weeks, basically, I was working on the kind of the JavaScript implementation, which I'm going to show you a little bit today. Have you seen that one before? For the JavaScript? No? No? Well, basically, the idea when I was working with that one was that I wanted to, because the most time-consuming part of the .NET project was trying to simulate the query execution of CRM. So then when you basically run a fetch XML, then it actually satisfies the conditions, all the different joins, the projections, as if they were running against CRM. That was, time-consuming, like 2 years. And I didn't want to repeat that. So on the first version, I wanted to reuse the .NET side of things as a kind of a fake backend. And then I used something called Edge.js. Do you know what Edge.js is? No? It's a project that basically allows you to run .NET code inside a Node.js process. So when you test with Jest, the Jest framework, Jest is using NPM, as basically Andre was showing you before. Yeah. So if it's using NPM with Edge, I could reuse the backend inside the Node process. So I will have to re-implement that from scratch again. But the main issue is that project hasn't been maintained in a long time now, and it looks like it doesn't get many updates. And the other reason I basically removed that dependency was because it was really slow compared to just running unit tests in .NET. For example, a unit test in .NET might take like 3 milliseconds, 5 milliseconds, something like that. But because it was going through a different process, it was like each unit test was taking like 900 milliseconds, almost up to 1 second, which is not a big problem for one, but when you have 3,000, takes a little bit. So as I said earlier, for Power Apps Component Framework, they actually, the project template they set up, they use TypeScript, so you could use Jest for testing that. The thing you won't be able to test is the React components themselves, because that's not yet supported, but it will be. So you can use that to leverage, the same thing I'm explaining today, you can reuse it. Okay, so let's do the demo and see how much time I have left. Cool. Any questions so far? Not yet? Not yet. Okay, so let me just show you how the... before I go into the demo, let me show you basically, this is the... I set up basically 2 new repos. One for this Saturday Kyiv. Did I pronounce that correctly? Kyiv? Yeah? Kyiv? Okay. I need to train a little bit more. So in this repo, you basically have the slides, and you have links to all the other different repos that I'm just showing here. So you can use this as a kind of a starting point. And also for the JavaScript, I won't have time to cover a lot of different things, but I created another one just to basically with the sample project for the JavaScript side of things, or actually TypeScript, yeah? So you can just take a look later on. Okay, so let me just, this project I'm just showing right here. This is the slides. Sorry, it always happens. I need to switch. There we go. That was the one I was trying to show you earlier. So basically you have, this is the Kyiv repo, and then you have links to the .NET project and the client-side version of it, and the 2 basically projects I'm using for this. Yeah. So feel free, just take a look. And actually, if you have any questions after the session, because this is too short, just raise an issue on this repo or whatever, Okay, so and then for this one, for the client side, there's another project, a repo template you can just to get up and running, and this is really easy to install. Basically, npm install, npm build, and npm test, and you should get all the things set up for you. Okay, so I'll just go into the .NET side. And how many people have used this project by any chance? Fake XRM, is it?
Fake XRM, yes.
Fake XRM, one?
Yes, fake XRM.
Okay, nice. Okay, so then, yeah, for some of you, probably you already know how this works, and I'll just do some basic stuff for now, but maybe I'll show you some patterns I'm using as well. Does anyone know about, for example, actually, does anyone did anyone code, for example, MVC, ASP.NET, MVC applications, for example? Yeah, so I'm going to use, for this as well, I'm using some of the design patterns you might find, on lots of different places, like, for example, this one. Do you know about the CQRS? Yeah? Okay, cool. So this is one I use everywhere because since this is mocking the main endpoint for dynamics, any complex logic as one as you want, you can break it down into small different pieces. So I always break a bigger logic into small pieces because because then when you have a bunch of unit tests, it's so easy to just, for some things, basically, some requirements get out of date, you can just go and just delete stuff. And it's still built, because it's still so clean, and it's really easy to maintain. So, so for the purpose of this demo, I have created this. I always build the logic around this class, which is called generic result, yeah? And this generic result, I can use it to basically tell that, oh, I want to execute some logic, and I just want to know if it succeeded or not. And if it didn't succeed, another message. And then I can return this is using generics as well. So I can return any data that I want as part of that message. With this template, I can just build as many complex logic as I want because all the the main logic is divided always on many different execute methods by execute. If I want to add anything, I just can remove it. If you want to add something new, I can just add it, and the message signature is always the same to return stuff. So it's really great. I'll show you in a second. For example, so let's say, for example, I don't know, I had as part of my plugin, I want just to create a contact because, for example, and I'm going to reuse that logic from somewhere else in CRM. Say I needed a logic where I need to create a contact, and that contact cannot, for example, be duplicated based on, for example, email address. Something really basic just to get started with. So in that case, I will do something like this, for example. I will go something like create a new class, and it's going to be create contact command, for example. So before I can use this project, for the ones that you are not familiar with this project, it's basically a NuGet package. The only thing I need to get up and running is just go to NuGet and then click on manage NuGet packages, and then browse. Hopefully I have proper internet connection, yeah. And then just search fake XRM, easy. And then there are many different packages for the different versions of CRM we have. You can just grab the one for, say, for example, 365. This is actually for version 8.2 something. This version 2015, and the other ones, and also the latest one for V9 is there as well. You can just grab the one, install it, and you can start using it. In this case, I had already installed it. It's the only difference, but then everything else, I'm just doing it from scratch. Okay. So I'm gonna just build a really simple logic that basically creates a contact record. So I always put that into something like public class create command and inherits from base command. And this is only, I use this template because base command is where you can do some things like logging, exception handling, and then you can implement that in the one place, and it's the one place you need to change only. So that method basically should override this one. Oh, the very first thing you need to do is basically also remove all the unnecessary packages that you don't need, because you're just polluting the global namespace with stuff you don't need. And okay, so this is my piece of logic I'll use to create a command. So how can I actually test that bit? So I'm going to do proper TDD. I'm going to start with the test first, yeah? And so let's going to create a new test for that piece of logic. And delete. I always, when I create a unit test project, I always try to follow the same folder structure. So that way, it's really easy to find the stuff you you need to add or edit or delete. For example, if I had a commands folder, and that's going to be reused by potentially many different plugins, then in the unit test project, I always have a commands folder, so I know basically all the tests that belongs to commands are always in the same place. So let's add a new class, for example, and this is going to be called create contact command tests. And I always use the this kind of naming convention of using kind of the same class ending with tests. Because of the same thing, because it helps you find stuff when you have like 3,000 different files. Okay, so this is my test project, and I'm gonna add some. So the first thing I need to do is basically implement something that creates a contact based on an email address. So this is how it looks like. Should create contact, for example. Contact record. Yeah. And I'm using XUnit to run the tests. And so the first thing I need to do is create this class. Sorry. This class basically is kind of the main entry point for doing anything against the organization service. It's like it simulates a CRM database, but it runs in memory inside my process, in this case in Visual Studio, or inside, if I was running this as part of a build agent, then as part of the build agent process. And the really cool thing is that in just one single line of code, like this, I get kind of a fake organization service with all the messages, like create, update, delete, all the query expressions, link queue, fetch XML. Everything I do anything with this service is going to use that database in memory. It doesn't hit CRM at all. And that's the good thing. Everything is mocked by default. You have to do mocks. The idea behind this is that when you use it for testing, you just compare kind of an initial state of data, of entities, and against a final state, which is what happens after the test runs. And then you just do queries to say what was changed, or what the data that was created or deleted or updated or whatever is what I expected it to be. Yeah. So for example, this unit test is saying that basically should create a contact. So what should happen at the end is that, for example, that should be a contact in the database, basically. Yeah. So I start from 0 contacts in my database. When you create a new instance, my database is empty, it has nothing. Yeah. Something like this. Single contacts. So basically, this is saying when I run this, and this obviously is going to fail, I'm saying there should be at least one contact in that collection of contacts, basically. Yeah. Hopefully, it's running. Yeah, it's failing. Fine, because I didn't implement anything yet. It's doing nothing. Yeah.
What is a contract type? Is it some XML?
Yeah.
Easy predefined standard types?
No.
Created some proxy?
Great question. No, it was generated automatically using early bound. So when you run CMSVC util,
yes.
So that's the one. So this is using the SDK. So actually, good question, but I had another project set up to basically, with a filter XML, I can put all the entities I want to be generated as classes, and then I run it whenever I want to add something new. And also, I run this as well as part of a build. The reason is because when you work with functional consultants, it might happen that someone might delete something, like a field or something, and then suddenly everything is broken. So But you wouldn't know if you didn't rebuild the entities as part of the build process, because the build process is going to cache the previous entity with the previous fields. So if you generate this as part of the build process as well, you get those kind of things as well, which is handy. Okay, but yeah, it's using the standard SDK. Yeah, great question, thank you. So then, this is fiddling. So I need to just go to my command class and just implement something that basically creates a contact. Yeah, and this is fairly simple. Let me just say, for example, to keep it simple, the only data I need to populate in the contact is just email address. Yeah, keep it simple. So I'm passing the email address as a property, string, for example, and then, well, actually, I don't need to. This is for the second test. Sorry, I'm just too ahead. The only thing I need to do is basically just create a contact. Yeah, so it's basically as simple as service create. That's going to be in contact, only in contact, and this is the. Sorry. There you go. Type identities. And the only thing it needs to have only is the email address. Equals. Come on. Email address. Yeah? When I do something like this, I can just go look at what I'm doing is, I need to return something as well. Return generic result. Fine. New generic result. There you go. So look at this. I added something to create a contact from Visual Studio. I didn't even have deployed anything yet to CRM. And I can just go from the test explorer and then I can run this test. And this should not pass. Why? That's the bucket. It's the beauty of it. So I can just go into this place. Oh, of course it's not working because I didn't execute the command. So I need to do something like this. New command, create commands. Create contact command. Yeah. And that's it. Execute with this service. So the first unit test takes a little while to set up, but then once you have one, all the others are basically the same thing, and it just takes almost nothing. So result equals this. So what I'm doing right here is I can run this now. There you go, succeeded, yeah? The only thing, so the beauty of this is you can add any logic and you have to mock the create message or the update message or the delete message or the queries. You just pass in some data. In this case, I didn't need any data because I'm starting from 0. But then on the next test, I'm going to show you, because this shouldn't create duplicates, then what happens if I had a contact before, yeah? So this is really easy. I could do things like, for example, checking the contact should have this attribute with this value, blah, blah, blah. But, will take like maybe 24 hours to explain. So, okay, so let's say I implemented this, which is creating a contact, and I did really minimum stuff to get that requirement implemented. So the second requirement is basically I shouldn't create duplicates. So I'm gonna just copy and paste this as a new unit test because it's a different scenario where I had a contact previously existing in the database. So how this should work? Should not create duplicate contact record, yeah. And basically, so because it shouldn't create duplicates, then I need to initialize it somehow. How this works? Basically, I do pretty much almost the same thing, but I run, before executing this logic, I call a method called initialize, which is used to define the initial set of data that kind of, if you were testing this manually, you needed to have a contact in the database. So what I'm just telling is kind of the same thing. Before running this, assume you have this contact record in the database. How this works, it looks like this. New contact. New gate. And say with an email address something. For example, I don't know, my email address. Yeah, and then before executing this, I'm just saying context dot initialize this contact. Yeah. Okay, and then if I run this now, you can also, by the way, you can also enable live unit testing if you wish to do so. And as soon as you make changes, then it gets reflected in the test explorer as well. Have you used live unit testing? No. Let me just enable it. So if you go to the test menu, this is only for enterprise, but
that's why.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, you can use there are open source versions as well where you can do this something similar. So you could basically do just start. The good thing is basically okay, the demo factor. Okay, I'll run them manually. I just have something installed. So for this case, they basically should have this duplicate contact. Now I'm running it and just making sure that shouldn't have duplicates in this case because it's not checking that that shouldn't create duplicates based on the email address. Then it's failing because at the end of the day, this is returning two different contacts actual as opposed to just one. So how can I implement both things now? So I'll go back to the, and this is really relevant. I always starting with the test first and then just making the implementation validate that test. So if I go to the command again, the only thing I need to do is just do a query to make sure it doesn't create a duplicate for that email address. This is very simple. I'm going to use LinkQ. Anyone is using LinkQ? CRM LinkQ? Nice. Okay. Because you are not forced to use LinkQ. You can use fetch XML, you can use query expressions, anything. It works the same way. Okay, so service. And just going var existing contacts, for example, from context in my query contact. Then where c dot email address. Sorry. Aha, because I removed the usings, I need to import now system dot LinkQ, and this should work now. Yeah. Equals the email address I'm passing in. First or default, and actually I can do contact exists, and this is different than null, and so only if contact doesn't exist, yeah, then just copy and paste this super complicated line of code. And then this is not going to work because I'm missing something like this, which is exactly. So, for example, say I want to create a contact based on this email address, which is the same one I passed in the initialize phase. So then this hopefully should work now. There you go. So it's pretty easy. You can start making loads of changes and just testing them locally within your Visual Studio before deploy it, because when you deploy and something is working, it's when you really spend time. Yeah. So this is kind of the main advantages. I have like almost 15 minutes only, so I'll jump to the JavaScript side of things now. Okay, so For the JavaScript, any questions so far, by the way? No? Great. Are you sleeping? Great. Do you want a beer? Okay, I'll woke you up now.
How do you usually create the complex data structures for the tests? If you, for example, need to create dozens of records to run one test.
When you have a bunch of records, for example.
Yeah, for example, one record contains a lot of other records, and each other record contains,
yeah.
I need whole structure to run one test.
Yeah, great question. So, for example, say the contact was related to an account, for example, yeah? And you want to see basically how do I simulate the relationships, the data that is related to each other, yeah?
What is the usual way to create multiple data for a test?
Yeah. The thing with unit testing is that you don't have to create a massive amounts of data. As you have seen, you only need to set up the minimum data that is needed for the test to pass. Yeah. For this logic that is creating
let's assume it's a complex test. You have a complex data.
Yeah. Yeah.
Get inputs
Yeah.
for our test.
Yeah.
So what is the usual way to create this testing data? Use JSON, predefine JSON data with data, or creating, as you typed here, create new entity when you input field's name
Yeah.
and so on, or loading from some outer source.
Yeah.
The usual way.
The usual way I'm using is just create the data like I shown you, but when we have different tests like this one, you can use the constructor like this. You could do something like public, and then just put the common data in the one place, and then really what changes between tests is just a few, for example, attributes and that kind of stuff. So it keeps the data more or less low. I wouldn't use a JSON file because when the unit test needs to hit the disk, then it's when it's really slow. And also the risk with using like an external JSON file is that it's never in sync with the code. So the benefit of using this is that whenever, for example, someone deletes an attribute from the database, if I run the SVC util to generate the attribute, then I immediately see that attribute was missing. It's gone, you know. And then this is basically failing because of that, and you know immediately. And in a separate JSON file, it's always a bit more messy. But a JSON file maybe would make sense for integration testing. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I have a question about hproxy packages. What for?
Oh, that's gonna be, it's outdated, it's deprecated now. I'm not using that anymore. That used to be for whenever the JavaScript first implementation was using this as the backend.
So
and
they are useless for now.
the proxy ones, yeah, you can ignore those. Yeah, I'll update the description. Yeah.
First of all, thank you very much for this tool because we use it in our project. But the question is, we would like to check like a chain of different plugins, and that's possible because you can register.
Yeah.
However, you need to use context and something like this contact, yeah, when you have proxy classes.
Yeah.
And I went quite deep inside and realized that okay, that works only if you have type code, anti-type code inside, because the logic is built on anti-type code. However, we don't use it. And is there any plans to support like anti-to-name instead of anti-type code?
Sure. Was that raised as an issue already? Probably.
We have one plugin which is rate like a chain of different. So like we create contact and we'd like to execute contact plugin like a chain.
Yeah.
And if we use just entity, then that plugin is never executed.
So and there's an optional feature you can activate. It's called plugin simulation. Are you using that one?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll take that one. I'll look at that one then. Yeah. To see what can we do. That was actually implemented by somebody from the Netherlands. So it was nice. 15 minutes. Yeah.
I have an analogical question about, as I know, we have not a lot of options about dynamics testing, and as far as I know, we have XRM mockup also tool which actually making some kind in-memory implementation of instance with chaining, with calling plugin, which will be triggered on create if we will use create in our test in our testing model.
Yeah. Yeah.
So do you plan to implement?
That's in relation to kind of the same question he was saying. So that's using the pipeline simulation. That basically you can say when the create message is called, not just do the create, but also fire this message or this plugin. But I need to take a look at that one to see how it's kind of the latest status. Personally, I'm not using it because always any complex logic, I always try to break it down into smaller pieces. So that's why, for example,
separately it's look fine, but when we all publish into our CRM instance, we can have some unexpected behavior.
Yeah.
We didn't mention. Oh, it's this plugin affects that plugin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Raise an issue maybe on the GitHub repo, and I'll take a look. I'll double check again the simulation, what the status is. Yeah, thanks.
Jordi, kind of related question. So actually, we have also some hidden system plugins like MSD library.
Okay.
Is there any way to kind of fire them, to test against them?
Like
so kind of, hidden validation. So for example, that some money field should be greater or equal to 0.
Okay. Yeah.
Something like that. How it's covered?
And
covered at all?
And those libraries, what kind of libraries they are? Like
system ones, system CRM plugins.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Well, are they managed solutions? So then, in theory, we cannot grab the assembly,
So kind of no good way.
If they are in a managed solution, we cannot grab the assembly. So maybe the only option is to do it through integration testing. Yeah. We can always encourage Microsoft to release open source stuff. And then So any other questions? I have like only 10 minutes left, yeah? So I'm gonna just fly through the JavaScript side of things. I'm gonna go actually setting codes. Samples. And so for this one, I'm using for JavaScript, I'm using Visual Studio Code. The main reason is for TypeScript and JavaScript, you need a heavy dev environment like Visual Studio. So this is much more lightweight. It opens way faster. And also because it has a bunch of extensions you can use for testing of JavaScript and TypeScript that you don't have actually in the enterprise even. So I'm going to show you for this example, if you go to repo, there's another link into this one, which is only for the client side. And very quickly, this comes with a predefined packaging and a TS config already set up to use Jest. And the Visual Studio, the VS Code extensions that I'm using, apart from, so you can actually run it from the console. You can just go and say, you just need to do npm install, npm run build, and then you can do npm run test. And that's basically using Jest to run the unit test. But in addition to that, you can, if you use these extensions, this is running now. I just sort of a couple of few sample unit tests, very basic. This is what you actually would do, for example, inside DevOps. You would use this, but inside Visual Studio Code, it's more handy to use the extension. So actually, in the repo, I set up something like there's a DevOps build you can use to also as an example. Yeah. So this is published into npm. It's using Azure pipelines, the neo-YAML pipelines to build, which is very easy. Only 3 steps. npm install, npm run build, npm test. You can even group those. You can copy and paste that into any existing pipeline you have, and then you can reuse the same for not just this, but for the XRM page, for PCF controls. Same thing, because everything is TypeScript now. Yeah. Okay. So these are all the configuration, and the mainly three VS Code extension I was using are basically this one, Jest. This one provides kind of live unit testing inside Visual Studio Code. So it highlights the unit tests that are running, that are passing. Like for this, for example, this one. This is green because of that extension, yeah? And the other two extensions I'm using is the Test Explorer UI to be able to have some tests running from Visual Studio Code, and also the Jest Text Explorer. So the Test Explorer extension is just for this UI, and then there are other extensions to support the different test frameworks. And because this is using Jest, I'm using this one. The cool thing about this is that whenever I want to debug something, for example, should initialize is this one. I just put a breakpoint and then click debug. It goes straight into there. Yeah? Which when you do just run npm run test, it runs everything. But you cannot just go into one specific one if you want to troubleshoot something, or that's really handy. And then you could just debug it from Visual Studio Code. It's really nice. Same thing. You can just start adding stuff and testing it before deploying into CVM as a web source or as a PCF control in future, or etc. So how this works very quickly, because I don't have time. So similar way, there's the XRM fake context, and I'm just telling it a fake URL. So this is like saying everything that basically is using this fake URL I'm using is gonna, it internally has a kind of a fake XML HTTP request that is listening for these URLs, and when it finds one, it executes the request using this. So very similar to the .NET, but in TypeScript. And when it finds the request, it creates, if that was a create message, it's going to create a small JavaScript object for that contact record. It's going to leave it in any member database. So you can just then do queries as well to retrieve the data. I'm going to open up now this was very simple, but if you want to look at all the different tests we have right now, then if you just go to the JS project directly, this repo, for example, query tests, just use pretty much the same approach. For example, it should return an empty data set if there are no records for the entity requested. So basically it's saying initializing two contacts with two first names, and then the query behind the scenes is just filtering by different values, so it should return something different, But it's the same approach. Whenever you need to have some data for testing, you just pass it as part of this method. Then you run any web API methods, and then at the end you basically make sure when you, for example, actually this one. For example, the create tests. There's this method you could do to give me all the data and then give me all the accounts and then give me the one that has this grid, and then you could do any sorts of validations, assertions in JavaScript, for example. Yeah. So it's the same idea. And you can combine these two guys, this guy with the XRM mock, which is only for the XRM page, which just for the logic and in the form, and they look like, for example, this. So, for example, this is like this tab should be hidden based on some property. So I'm just making a call to retrieve that property, and then when that one completes, then I'm making sure that it's set to true. It should be actually visible in this case. Yeah? So you can combine the both to be able to just do the same thing we were doing in .NET, but in JavaScript. And only 5 minutes left, just in time. Any questions? Yeah?
In this way, we can check visibility, enable, and so what kind of XRM page UI standard function are covered by XRM context? How many functions we can check by this?
How many, what, sorry?
How many standard functions get visible, get enabled?
Like
Section, stub, fields.
Great question. No, this again, like with data, you can create the kind of the metadata you want for the unit tests. There's also, apart from this, There's a separate project, separate people called XRM mock dash generator, and you can use that to say from a form XML in CRM, just get me all the metadata, and basically generates a bunch of these fields and tabs and sections, so you have it there for you to use. That's your option. You can do it manually this way, or you can just use that to generate metadata and then just test the logic that basically needs to, for example, make this tab visible, hidden, or this section collapse, expand, etc. Yeah.
Jordi, does it work with grid functions?
With what?
With grid functions. So, for example, you have handlers for grid changing items. So, for example, you have handler function for adding new items to grid.
That's planned. It's not yet, but it's planned. So basically, if you go to the JS, this is what we have so far, and this is what is planned for. Because, for example, for retrieve, you can retrieve with alternate keys. You can retrieve, and the same for the functions. You know, for now, I'll just something easy for you to say. Whenever I call this web API function, then just return this. It's like a mock. And if someone wants something more complicated, you're more than welcome to raise a pull request. Any questions? More questions? No? Can we take a picture together?
Sure.
Thank you. Oh, wait, I left my mobile. Sorry, right there.
Thank you.
You're welcome. There we go. Picture. Oops. That's a screen. That's a production bug. There we go. I'll try to fit. Maybe I'm too tall. I'm too tall. There we go. Thank you.
Smart. Less stress, joy of success.